I wanted to talk about the id and superego, the development, and the ridiculous bullshit at this fucking church. They believe your id and ego is God talking to you, and these people are God, so they're the God and the devil, and they're talking to you. Yeah. So you gotta first understand development, and it's pretty straightforward. The first thing you learn how to be when you're born is reactionary. So babies are all Republicans, and your single reaction, the first time you use your eyes, it's painful. So as a baby, you and babies just cry for everything. That would be the id. Your primal instinct. You want milkies? Bah! You want the air conditioner turned down? Bah! And babies get it done. They want to be taken care of. Like a malignant narcissist. They want you to do all the emotional processing and all the work. They're not gonna. Because they're babies. And I know a lot of people are attracted to that. They think that's sexy, and a man, I think you might have a mental problem. The superego is your morals, and this is the thing. The reason why the superego takes so long to develop is because it requires consciousness, awareness, and it requires the other things to be complete before its own development. And the superego is fascinating because it's basically a complete wad of perceived moral behaviors. And we're going to talk about perceived moral behaviors. In this church, the Church of the Anal Eaten Mummy, plowing your kids is normal. Getting your baby raped is normal. And that's moral to them. To normal people, it's not moral. It's disgusting and weird. And one, objectively, emotionally stunted trauma response to being raped. So these people are all mentally ill to begin with. But as I was saying, so when your morals come up, the simplest way to put it, remember in psychology, is your ego's the thing that tells you steal the cookie from the cookie jar, and your superego is thou shalt not steal cookie from the cookie jar. I've always fused the id and ego together, but that's just Bobby psychology. I don't really see a difference because they both are kind of forms of selfishness, and the ego is literally just self-awareness, and arguably it is a big chunk of selfishness, because who's your ego affect? It affects you. Yeah. Well, it's the superego effect. It affects other people. And your ego can objectively affect other people by your selfishness. A great example of this is I always use you wash up on an island, you have all the food reserves. You share with everybody, or do you keep it for yourself? You keep it. If you keep it for yourself, that's an ego brain. I only care about myself, everybody else can die. Okay. Superego, you share it with everybody. Okay. Doing the right thing's not as doing the right thing. How these idiots believe these things are God, and I remember Stu, like, when I tell you to do something bad, you hear the voice in your head, the ego. No, that's me. And when you do something good, that's me. And I was, so you're the guy that made me like fat chicks? And Stu was like, what? It's a weird thing to do, Stu. You might want to explain that one to me. This is what happens when you're an idiot, but it's kind of funny because it does supplant their whole idea of telepathy. You're not listening to your id or superego, and the other part is the malignant narcissists at the church, and a lot of the church members don't believe in Freudian psychology, and it's very significant because Freudian psychology involves bonding with your parents, creating emotional and connecting with other people in a meaningful way. Connecting with people in a meaningful way. When you develop, the first people you connect with, quite literally, is probably your mother, because you have an umbilical cord, but even that's kind of abstract, and they talk about breastfeeding's important, maybe, I don't know. I would argue interaction is probably the most, because I remember this whole Russian thing where they had a bunch of babies, and the babies all grew up to be psychopathic because there weren't enough nurses to basically hang out and play with them for extended periods. The wet nurses were just breastfeeding. They just breastfeed the baby, put it back in the cradle. Breastfeed, put it back in the cradle. That was the whole thing. That was the only interaction they ever got. So the that part of their brain just didn't develop. And your brain is developing, and it goes through a developed cycle. So, you have your id first. I'm hungry, and that's why babies eat till they puke. You have the ego, which is the self-realization. I exist, and I'm important. Kind of. Well, all I do is poop in diapers and pee myself, but, eventually we're going to get past that. And then you have the superego. And the superego, I can think of, in my head, a series of people doing the right thing and demonstrating to me doing the right thing. And with the superego, you also have to have the bigger picture in mind. We all live in our own worlds. You have your world, which is this small world, and then you have the bigger world, which is out there. And when you fail to recognize there's a world beyond your world, you're an idiot. Okay. My opinion. This church, there's only one world. They're made up insular society of dumb bullshit. And murdering people, because that's important, apparently. So this is just kind of, when talking to Stu, it was kind of funny because he had all this mental bullshit. And I would argue if you met somebody young enough and they didn't know what the id and the ego and super ego were, and they couldn't explain it to you well, you could probably convince them that you're telepathic and it's you that's making their decisions, when no. Yeah. But, in that regard, these people are also conditioned to work against one another. Whenever you're playing a board game, you're always playing against the other players. You're never playing with. There's not a natural enemy that everybody's against. Everybody's playing against one another. It's just kind of how board games work, like Monopoly. I was kind of funny as a kid because in Monopoly I just wanted to buy the railroads, and that's all I cared about. So in my tiny brain, in my little world, I won Monopoly every time because I bought the railroads. But then I would lose. Yeah. But, Monopoly's about getting a monopoly. It's pretty straightforward. When originally it's about socialism, but we're not going to get into that. So these people play board games, and it's funny because in video games you actually have teams and you can play against other people where you learn how to cooperate, and you would argue that working in tandem with other people and actually cooperating, you develop a superego because you develop a connection in that light. Now, they don't have real connections at the church, they have enmeshments. They are units, not human beings. I remember Republicans' family units. And I always think about it's kind of funny because babies are strictly reactionary and Republicans are reactionary, so you could argue babies are Republicans. We're all Republicans at birth. I only care about myself. I don't care about the environment. I want candies. It's the stomping and screaming and throwing the tantrum to get what you want, which is the standard tactic of these people at the church also. The understanding to the development of a person, I would argue this probably should be like a class you take in 5th or 6th grade on human psychology. So you understand how your own mind works, because there's even more intricate parts of this. Because Stu is like, you can hear God, and it's the ego, because he's an alien brain. He's alienated from his own ego, he's alienated from his own super ego, and he's told how these things work, but not really, because he's an idiot. And you can't explain that to him because he's an idiot. Here's the funny part. In people's minds, they actually perceive these things differently. Sometimes people like me, I hear it verbally. My super ego and ego, I hear them verbally. Some people just know, innately. Like, their ego's just there, and their super ego's there, and whichever wolf you feed is the one that's stronger. So, yeah, innately, they just know. I've always thought about, deaf people have never heard spoken language, and as a kid I just assumed that way they thought in their mind was through sign language. When actuality, the brain has its own complex language. There you go. Yeah, completely separate from everything else. Like, babies, very fascinatingly, babies develop their own language. Like, if you leave them alone long enough, they communicate through body language. kind of like a dog would. And dogs are lower forms of intelligence, so you could argue that because the baby's brain is underdeveloped, it simultaneously operates through body language. Cats and animals, a lot of animals, they communicate through body language, not through facial expressions. Dogs famously developed eyebrows to manipulate human beings because they recognize that we have a lot of facial expressions. Unless you go to this church, in which case you don't have many facial expressions. They're kind of, they don't do emotion. They're not human beings. As I said, they're trying to take it in the ass mentally and physically. And I say spiritually, but to them, LSD is spirituality, which is, you're on a drug, dude. That's not spirituality. You're doing drugs. Okay? Drugs are arguably masturbatory. These violent, stupid people. I don't know. Yeah, it's kind of crazy to be like, oh, my super ego is God, when it's actually just a compilation of what your learned morals are. And you can learn and unlearn morals. One of my things that's really crazy right now is people and trans people. Oh no, trans, he's a man, it's a woman, it goes against its own. Look, these idiots at the church, your natural brain development is as straightforward as that's how that goes. They drink lead and then go, this is what God wants. God wants me to drink lead. I would argue that drinking lead modifies your brain. It destroys your halo brain, which is where your super ego is, which is where your goodness comes from. And they drink tetralead to destroy that. So if God gave you a halo brain so you can be a good person, and then you go, I'm going to drink lead and get rid of it, you have made the decision that you have a better idea than the creator. Okay, I don't even believe in God, and I can understand that, and I could see God being really pissed off with you being like, so you think it's a good idea to remove the halo brain I gave you? Explain it. But these same people hate trans people. I don't really give a shit. Like, I went to school with a kid named Steven, and he told me he was a demon, so I just called him Demon Steven, because I don't care, one, but two, who am I to say he's not a demon? Okay, that's his life, he's a demon. Whatever, dude. I don't give a shit, because that's them. I've met all types of people in my life, and Stu, oh my god, okay, if he's allowed to do that, then trans people are allowed to change genders, okay, because these people are the furthest things from gods you could fucking meet. The delegation of everything to everybody else, and then showing how they can't do normal things, let alone complex things, and how they hate complex thought. The rage against intelligence. You find yourself drinking lead despite intelligence, you're a real dumbass. Intelligence so much. Oh no. I know why I piss these people off. I'm really bad. Here's a fun fact. I'm actually really bad at psychology. I know a lot about it, but implementing it, I'm really bad at it. And I've always found that kind of funny, because I can tell you like it is, but I can't tell you what it is or how to fix it. It is fascinating to some extent how far removed, but here's the thing you gotta remember about the malignant narcissist: they didn't develop attachments to their parents, they didn't develop connection with other human beings, so control is the only thing they're left with, and that's just common sense, okay? And that's why everything with the church is control, okay? And control is directly associated with the ego. So, the malignant narcissists stop developing at the ego, and they argue neuroplasticity means the brain can change, so maybe this creature could develop a superego. I don't believe that, but, maybe. I don't know. You'd have to look at the outer fucking halo brain and see how destroyed that is before you make any assumptions about that, in theory. Now, the ridiculous stupidity associated with this stuff is one of the things that's always bothered me, but whatever. You can't reason with these. You can't reason with somebody that thinks like the second or third developmental stage is the perfect psychology. I think like a 2-year-old. Like, okay. The other side of that is learning skills and shit is significantly important. And yes, when you're a kid, you're very good. When you're a baby especially, you're very good at developing and learning how to speak, learning how to write. These are all very complex things that become extremely difficult as you get older, as your brain starts becoming more set in its ways, as you develop an identity and a structure. And where your brain develops that structure is because its early stages are very neuroplastic. They change and develop. Somebody with an art brain can understand aesthetic sense. It took my dumb ass years to understand aesthetic sense. It's like, oh, you draw something that looks aesthetically pleasing. How the fuck does that work? But you have to develop the aesthetic sense. It's a completely separate type of thought process there. Music is another thing. It's another language, arguably, and it works completely different. And I remember not being interested in music because it's just a repetition of patterns, and that sounds bad to me, but that also makes sense because the church members are often way into music. I remember Gannon's psychopathic murdering ass loved music. He loved jazz, and that son of a bitch fucking could play the guitar, and he could memorize music and shit. And that makes sense because when your brain's constantly being destroyed by heavy metals, you probably constantly need to keep it working out so it doesn't just fall apart and stop working, like, oh no, my brains, I've destroyed it, I have to keep using it and doing repetitive tasks like speedrunning or playing the guitar over and over again because they're repetitive. And the brain is a pattern machine. If you know how your neural links work and how all these things work in all the different directions, they're patterns. Your brain just continuously, like a computer, ones and zeros. That's where your thought process and even memory recall comes from. How good your brain is at that dictates, I guess, how well it functions, and it doesn't function very well on heavy metals. So, yeah, the church leaders, I'm going to just say the church leaders because I had this conversation about Freudian psychology. They don't like it because they themselves weren't raised Freudian style. They didn't make connections with anybody. It's where they get their stupid psychopathy from and their ridiculous levels of narcissistic entitlement. Narcissists are famously like 100% freaking ego, so like, yeah, and I imagine if you don't have a super ego, you're left with only the ego, and you get emotionally stunted at an early age. You're nothing but a whiny baby that wants to be in control of everything, and once the ego is directly linked to control. And to some extent, when you think about it, a baby does kind of run things. I think even first-time parents learn how fast, like they have to wake up at ungodly hours and go feed or take care or change the diaper of this creature that can't fend for itself. And, that's all a part of parenting. That's something I never want in my life, by the way. I've lived my entire life with emotionally stunted adult children. I do not want kids ever, but these aspects are kind of funny because you think about how narcissists want control. Like, oh, dude, I want control. And this is the thing. When they are abused, it's part of the church. They abuse them, they rape them, they emotionally stunt them. So that shit, oh, I was raped as a kid. You hear me do it to Stu all the time. So I have control issues and guns. The truth is ego and shit is a replacement for insecurity. And the truth is these people are extremely insecure. If you ever find yourself going, I need a gun for safety. Why do you need a gun for safety? It's because you feel insecure. Okay? Some people can go around without a firearm. Some people can't. Some people need a teddy bear. Some people don't.